In 1995, a 16-year-old girl from Millbrook, Ohio, vanished without a trace after her high school homecoming dance, leaving behind only her silver shoes on the gymnasium steps and a community forever changed by unanswered questions. But 17 years later, a school janitor cleaning out old lockers would discover something that had been hidden in plain sight all along, a delicate silver necklace that would unlock secrets some people had prayed would stay buried forever. Carol Watson sat at her kitchen table on a gray October morning in 2012, the steam from her coffee mug rising like ghosts in the pale light filtering through her window. The house felt too quiet, as it had every morning for the past 17 years. She reached across the table for the newspaper, her fingers automatically avoiding the small framed photograph that sat beside the sugar bowl. Sarah Lynn's senior portrait, frozen in time at 16, her daughter's bright smile and cascading brown hair captured just 3 months before she disappeared. The local section of the paper usually held little interest for Carol, but today a headline made her pause. Lincoln High School begins major renovation project. She read the brief article about the modernization of her daughter's former school, the same building where Sarah Lynn had attended classes, laughed with friends, and danced for the last time at homecoming. The article mentioned that during the cleanup process, maintenance crews were discovering items that had been lost or forgotten over the decades. Carol set the paper aside and walked to the window, looking out at the maple tree in her backyard. Its leaves had turned the same golden color they had been that October in 1995 when everything changed. She could still remember the way Sarah Lynn had practiced her dance moves in this very kitchen, spinning and laughing as she prepared for homecoming night. Her daughter had been so excited, spending weeks shopping for the perfect dress, a deep blue satin gown that brought out her eyes. The phone rang, startling Carol from her memories. She glanced at the caller ID and saw it was Detective Harrison from the Millbrook Police Department. Her heart skipped a beat. After all these years, phone calls from the police still made her stomach clench with hope and dread in equal measure. Detective Harrison's voice was careful and professional when she answered. He explained that he was calling because the school renovation project had yielded something unexpected. A maintenance worker had found a piece of jewelry behind one of the old gym lockers, jewelry that might be connected to Sarah Lynn's case. The description he gave made Carol's breath catch in her throat. A delicate silver necklace with a small heart pendant, engraved with the letter S. Carol knew that necklace. She had given it to Sarah Lynn for her 16th birthday, just 2 months before homecoming. It had been her daughter's favorite piece of jewelry, something she wore every day. Sarah Lynn had been wearing it the night she disappeared, Carol was certain of it. She could picture her daughter fastening the clasp around her neck before leaving for the dance, the silver catching the light from her bedroom mirror. The detective asked if she could come to the station to identify the necklace, and Carol agreed immediately. After hanging up, she stood in her kitchen for several minutes, her hands shaking slightly as she processed what this discovery might mean. For 17 years there had been no concrete evidence, no real leads, just theories and speculation that led nowhere. The police had searched the school multiple times in those first few months after Sarah Lynn vanished, but somehow they had missed this small piece of silver hidden in the shadows. As Carol gathered her purse and car keys, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Not quite hope, but something close to it. A sense that maybe, finally, someone would be able to tell her what happened to her daughter on that crisp October night when Sarah Lynn Watson left for a dance and never came home. The drive to the police station took her past Lincoln High School, where she could see construction vehicles and workers in hard hats moving around the building. Somewhere in that maze of hallways and classrooms, Sarah Lynn's necklace had been waiting, a tiny piece of evidence that might hold the key to everything Carol had spent nearly 2 decades trying to understand. She pulled into the parking lot of the police station, her heart pounding with the weight of possibility and fear, knowing that whatever came next would either bring her closer to the truth about her daughter's disappearance, or plunge her back into the darkness of not knowing that had consumed so much of her life. Detective Harrison was waiting for Carol in the lobby of the Millbrook Police Department, his weathered face showing the kind of professional compassion that came from delivering difficult news to families for over 2 decades. He led her through familiar hallways to a small conference room where a clear evidence bag sat on the table, containing the delicate silver necklace that had emerged from its 17-year hiding place. Carol's breath caught as she looked at the jewelry through the plastic. Even tarnished by time and circumstance, she recognized it immediately. The heart pendant was slightly smaller than her thumbnail, and when Detective Harrison carefully turned the bag, she could see the faint engraving of the letter S on the back, just as she remembered. Her fingers trembled as she reached toward the bag, then stopped herself. The detective confirmed what Carol already knew in her heart. This was definitely Sarah Lynn's necklace, the one she had clasped around her daughter's neck so many times, the one that had become as much a part of Sarah Lynn as her infectious laugh or the way she unconsciously tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. Detective Harrison explained that the maintenance worker, Eddie Morales, had found the necklace wedged behind locker number 247 in the old gymnasium. The locker was located in a section that had been used primarily for storage of sports equipment, an area that students rarely accessed. What made the discovery even more puzzling was that the necklace appeared to have been deliberately placed there, tucked into a small crevice where it wouldn't be easily seen unless someone was specifically looking for it. As Carol sat in the sterile conference room, the detective's questions brought back memories of that last evening with Sarah Lynn. Her daughter had been getting ready for homecoming with the kind of nervous excitement that only comes with being 16 and in love. Sarah Lynn had been dating Tommy Chin for 3 months, and they had planned the perfect evening together: dinner at Romano's Italian restaurant followed by the dance at the school gymnasium. Carol remembered how radiant Sarah Lynn had looked in her blue satin dress, how she had practiced her dance moves in the living room while Carol helped her with her hair. They had talked about everything that night, from Sarah Lynn's college applications to her plans for the weekend. There had been no indication that anything was wrong, no hint that her daughter was troubled or planning to disappear. The timeline of that night was etched permanently in Carol's memory. Sarah Lynn had left the house at 6:30, picked up by Tommy and another couple for dinner. The dance had started at 8 o'clock and was scheduled to end at 11. According to witnesses, Sarah Lynn had been seen dancing and socializing normally throughout the evening. She had been crowned homecoming princess during the ceremony at 10 o'clock, a surprise that had made her glow with happiness. But sometime between 10:30 and 11, Sarah Lynn had vanished. Tommy had told police that she had stepped outside for fresh air around 10:45, saying she felt a bit dizzy from the warm gymnasium. When she didn't return after 15 minutes, he had gone looking for her. Her silver high-heeled shoes were found on the steps leading to the gymnasium's side entrance, neatly placed as if she had removed them intentionally. Detective Harrison pulled out the original case file, its thickness a testament to the extensive investigation that had followed Sarah Lynn's disappearance. He reminded Carol of the details she knew all too well. Over 200 students and faculty had been questioned. The surrounding woods had been searched by volunteers and law enforcement with dogs. Sarah Lynn's car was still in the school parking lot, her purse and keys locked inside. The investigation had focused heavily on several theories. Some believed Sarah Lynn had run away, though there was no evidence she had been unhappy or planning to leave. Others suspected foul play, but without a body or clear evidence of a crime, the case had eventually grown cold. A few cruel rumors had suggested that Sarah Lynn had staged her own disappearance for attention, theories that had devastated Carol and drove her to move to the other side of town to escape the whispers. Now, 17 years later, the discovery of the necklace was raising new questions. If Sarah Lynn had left voluntarily, why would her most precious piece of jewelry be hidden behind a gymnasium locker? If she had been the victim of a crime, how had the necklace ended up in such an obscure location? And perhaps most troubling of all, who had known to look for it there, and why had they chosen now to let it be found? Detective Harrison assured Carol that they would reopen the investigation, using modern forensic techniques that hadn't been available in 1995. The necklace would be tested for DNA evidence, and they would re-interview key witnesses from that night. He also mentioned that Eddie Morales, the janitor who had found the necklace, had worked at the school for over 20 years and might have insights about that time period that could prove valuable. As Carol left the police station, clutching a business card with Detective Harrison's direct number, she felt as though she was standing at the edge of a precipice. The necklace represented the first real clue in nearly 2 decades, but it also meant confronting the possibility that the truth about Sarah Lynn's disappearance might be more complicated and more painful than she had ever imagined. Eddie Morales had been cleaning Lincoln High School's hallways for 23 years, and he knew every corner, every shadow, every hiding place that students thought adults couldn't find. His weathered hands had mopped these floors through countless seasons, and his sharp eyes had seen things that would surprise most people about what really went on in the supposedly safe halls of suburban education. Detective Harrison found Eddie in the school's maintenance office on a Tuesday morning, surrounded by the familiar smell of industrial cleaning supplies and the quiet hum of boiler equipment. Eddie was a small man in his early 60s, with graying hair and intelligent dark eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment. When the detective introduced himself and mentioned Sarah Lynn Watson's case, Eddie's expression grew serious and thoughtful. Eddie remembered that October night in 1995 more clearly than he wished he could. He had been working late that evening, cleaning up after the homecoming dance, when he noticed several unusual things that had stuck with him all these years. The gymnasium had been decorated with streamers and balloons, and the cleanup always took until well past midnight after these big events. He told Detective Harrison about finding Sarah Lynn's shoes on the gymnasium steps, how they had been placed so deliberately, toes pointing toward the door as if she had stepped out of them with intention rather than losing them in a struggle. Eddie had been the one to call security that night when he realized the shoes belonged to the missing homecoming princess everyone was searching for. But there were other details from that night that Eddie had never shared with investigators, details that seemed insignificant at the time but had grown more troubling in his memory over the years. He had seen Mr. Richard Stone, the English teacher, in the building much later than usual that night, long after the dance had ended and most faculty had gone home. Eddie remembered this clearly because Mr. Stone had been carrying a large black garbage bag and had seemed startled when Eddie encountered him near the gymnasium storage area. When Eddie had asked if Mr. Stone needed help with anything, the teacher had been unusually flustered, explaining that he was just cleaning up some decorations that had fallen behind the stage equipment. But Eddie had thought it odd because the custodial staff was responsible for all cleanup, and teachers typically left immediately after school events ended. The discovery of Sarah Lynn's necklace had happened purely by accident. Eddie was helping with the renovation project, clearing out old lockers that hadn't been used in years. Locker 247 was located in a section of the gymnasium that had been converted to storage space sometime in the early 2000s, an area where old sports equipment and unused furniture collected dust. When Eddie had pulled an old wrestling mat away from the wall, he noticed that one of the locker doors was slightly ajar. Inside the locker, he found the usual debris of decades past, old papers, broken pencils, a few forgotten textbooks. But as he cleaned it out completely, preparing it for removal, his flashlight caught a glint of silver in the narrow gap between the locker and the wall. He had to use a coat hanger to fish the necklace out from where it had been wedged, hidden in a space so small and dark that it would have been invisible unless someone knew exactly where to look. What troubled Eddie most was the location itself. This particular section of lockers had been installed in 1987, but they were rarely assigned to students because of their remote location. The area was primarily used by custodial staff and occasionally by teachers who needed to store materials for extended periods. The fact that Sarah Lynn's necklace had ended up there suggested that whoever had hidden it knew the school's layout intimately and understood which areas were seldom visited. Detective Harrison asked Eddie about other faculty members who had access to that area of the building. Eddie mentioned that Mr. Stone had often used the storage space for his drama club props and sets, since he also directed the school plays. The English teacher had keys to most areas of the building because of his various extracurricular responsibilities, and he frequently stayed late for rehearsals and meetings. Eddie also recalled that in the weeks following Sarah Lynn's disappearance, Mr. Stone had seemed different somehow, more withdrawn and nervous than usual. The teacher had always been friendly with Eddie before, often stopping to chat during his evening cleaning rounds. But after that October night, Mr. Stone had become distant, barely acknowledging Eddie when their paths crossed in the hallways. There was something else that had bothered Eddie for years, a detail that seemed almost too small to mention but had nagged at him nonetheless. On the Monday morning after Sarah Lynn disappeared, Eddie had found broken glass in the hallway outside Mr. Stone's classroom. When he had asked the teacher about it, Mr. Stone had claimed that a student had accidentally knocked over a picture frame during Friday's classes. But Eddie was certain he had cleaned that hallway thoroughly on Friday evening, and there had been no broken glass at that time. As Detective Harrison took notes, Eddie emphasized that he wasn't trying to accuse anyone of wrongdoing. Mr. Stone had always been well regarded by students and faculty, known for his passionate teaching and dedication to the drama program. But the combination of strange behavior and unexplained circumstances had created doubts in Eddie's mind that had only grown stronger with time. The detective thanked Eddie for his detailed recollections and assured him that all information would be investigated thoroughly. As they shook hands, Eddie mentioned one final detail that had occurred to him. He still had some of his old work schedules from 1995, records that might show exactly which areas of the building he had cleaned on which nights. If Detective Harrison was interested, Eddie would be happy to dig through his files at home to see what he could find. Detective Harrison spent the next morning reviewing Mr. Richard Stone's personnel file in the principal's office at Lincoln High School. The records painted a picture of a dedicated educator who had joined the faculty in 1992, 3 years before Sarah Lynn's disappearance. Stone had been 28 years old when he was hired, fresh from graduate school with impressive credentials and glowing recommendations from his student teaching supervisors. Principal Margaret Caldwell, who had been assistant principal during Stone's early years at the school, spoke highly of his contributions to the English department and drama program. She described him as a passionate teacher who connected well with students, particularly those interested in literature and theater. Stone had directed successful productions of Shakespeare plays and contemporary dramas, often staying late to work with students on their performances. But as Detective Harrison dug deeper into the timeline around Sarah Lynn's disappearance, some inconsistencies began to emerge. The official faculty sign-out sheet from homecoming night showed that Stone had left the building at 11:15 p.m., just 15 minutes after the dance ended. However, Eddie's account placed Stone in the building much later, closer to midnight or beyond. Detective Harrison decided to locate Stone, who had left Lincoln High School in 2003 to take a position at a private academy in Columbus. The detective's phone calls revealed that Stone was now 48 years old, still teaching English, and had maintained what appeared to be an exemplary career. His current principal described him as reliable and well-respected, though perhaps more reserved than some of the younger faculty members. When Detective Harrison reached Stone by phone, the teacher's initial response was one of surprise and what seemed like genuine concern about Sarah Lynn's case being reopened. Stone readily agreed to meet with the detective, suggesting they could talk at his current school during his lunch break. His willingness to cooperate appeared forthright, but Detective Harrison noted a slight tension in Stone's voice when discussing the specific details of homecoming night. During their conversation, Stone maintained that his memories of that evening were somewhat hazy due to the passage of time. He confirmed that he had helped supervise the dance as required of all faculty members, but insisted he had left promptly when his duties were finished. When asked about Eddie's recollection of seeing him later in the building, Stone paused for several seconds before suggesting that the janitor might be misremembering the timeline or confusing that night with another evening. Stone did acknowledge that he had occasionally used the storage area near the gymnasium for drama club materials, explaining that the space was convenient for storing large set pieces and props. He seemed particularly careful when discussing his access to various parts of the building, emphasizing that any keys he possessed were standard issue for faculty members with extracurricular responsibilities. What struck Detective Harrison as most interesting was Stone's reaction when asked about Sarah Lynn specifically. While he described her as a bright student who had been in his sophomore English class the previous year, he seemed to have unusually detailed memories of her personality and academic performance. He mentioned that she had written a particularly impressive essay about ambition and sacrifice in Macbeth, a detail that seemed remarkably specific for a student he had taught briefly 2 years earlier. The detective made plans to drive to Columbus the following day for a face-to-face interview, sensing that phone conversations would only reveal so much about Stone's demeanor and truthfulness. As he hung up, Detective Harrison couldn't shake the feeling that the English teacher was being carefully selective about which memories he chose to share and which details he claimed had faded with time. The forensics lab at the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation had seen thousands of pieces of evidence over the years, but few carried the weight of 17 years of unanswered questions like Sarah Lynn Watson's silver necklace. Dr. Patricia Chin, the lead forensic scientist assigned to the case, handled the delicate jewelry with the reverence it deserved, knowing that this small piece of metal might finally provide answers to a family's decades of anguish. Under the harsh fluorescent lights of the laboratory, the necklace revealed secrets that had been locked away since 1995. Dr. Chen's initial examination showed that the silver had tarnished in patterns that suggested it had been exposed to moisture and varying temperatures over many years. More significantly, there were microscopic fibers caught in the chain's links, fibers that appeared to be synthetic and dark in color. The DNA analysis would take several days to complete, but Dr. Chen was able to provide Detective Harrison with some immediate findings. The necklace showed signs of having been handled recently, despite its long concealment. There were fresh fingerprints on the heart pendant, prints that were too clear and distinct to have survived 17 years of environmental exposure. This suggested that someone had handled the necklace within the past few months, perhaps even weeks. More intriguingly, the forensic team discovered traces of a cleaning solution on the chain, a specific type of industrial cleaner that was commonly used in schools and institutional buildings. The chemical signature matched products that had been in use at Lincoln High School for decades, but the concentration suggested the necklace had been deliberately cleaned before being placed in its hiding spot. Dr. Chen also found something that made Detective Harrison's pulse quicken. Caught in the clasp mechanism was a single dark hair, perfectly preserved in the silver's protective embrace. The hair was coarse and showed signs of recent cutting, with a distinct color that could be matched to a suspect if one was identified. Even more promising, the root was intact, meaning nuclear DNA testing could provide a definitive genetic profile. While waiting for the complete forensic results, Detective Harrison received a call that added another layer of complexity to the investigation. Carol Watson had remembered something important about the weeks following Sarah Lynn's disappearance. She had found a sympathy card in their mailbox about 2 weeks after the homecoming dance, a card with no return address and no signature, containing only a typed message expressing condolences for her loss. What had struck Carol as odd at the time was that the card referred to Sarah Lynn in the past tense, as if the sender knew with certainty that she was dead rather than simply missing. The local police had dismissed it as the work of a well-meaning but tactless community member, but Carol had kept the card all these years, tucked away in Sarah Lynn's memory box alongside other mementos from that difficult time. Detective Harrison asked Carol to bring the card to the station, recognizing its potential value as evidence. If the same person who had handled Sarah Lynn's necklace had also sent the card, there might be fingerprints or DNA that could link the two pieces of evidence together. Meanwhile, the detective had scheduled his face-to-face interview with Mr. Stone for the following afternoon. Armed with the new forensic information, he would be able to ask much more specific questions about Stone's activities on homecoming night and in the weeks that followed. The microscopic evidence was beginning to paint a picture of calculated concealment rather than random loss. The most disturbing aspect of Dr. Chen's findings was the implication that Sarah Lynn's necklace had been deliberately preserved and hidden by someone who understood its significance. This wasn't a piece of jewelry that had been accidentally dropped or carelessly discarded. Someone had taken great care to clean it, conceal it, and ensure it would eventually be found when they were ready for it to be discovered. Riverside Academy sat on a pristine campus in Columbus, its brick buildings and manicured lawns reflecting the kind of private school elegance that attracted families seeking alternatives to public education. Detective Harrison arrived 15 minutes early for his appointment with Mr. Richard Stone, using the time to observe the teacher's current environment and speak with administrators who had worked with him for nearly a decade. The headmaster, Dr. William Green, described Stone as a model faculty member who had never given them cause for concern. Stone's students consistently performed well on standardized tests, and his drama productions were among the school's most popular events. Dr. Green seemed genuinely puzzled by the detective's questions about Stone's past, insisting that any suggestion of impropriety was completely inconsistent with the man they knew. When Stone finally appeared in Dr. Green's office, Detective Harrison was struck by how little the man had changed from his faculty photo in the 1995 Lincoln High School yearbook. Now 48, Stone had added some silver to his dark hair and wore wire-rimmed glasses that gave him a scholarly appearance. He was dressed in a navy blazer and khaki pants, every inch the respectable English teacher. Stone's demeanor was polite and cooperative, but Detective Harrison noticed subtle signs of nervousness. The teacher's hands moved frequently, adjusting his glasses and straightening papers on the desk between them. When discussing Sarah Lynn's case, Stone maintained appropriate expressions of concern and sympathy, but his eyes rarely met the detective's directly for more than a few seconds at a time. The detective began with general questions about homecoming night, allowing Stone to establish his version of events before introducing the more challenging details. Stone repeated his earlier claims about leaving the building promptly after the dance ended, describing his duties that evening as routine supervision of student behavior and helping with basic cleanup tasks. When Detective Harrison mentioned Eddie Morales' account of seeing Stone in the building much later that night, the teacher's response was more defensive than explanatory. Stone suggested that Eddie might have been confused or perhaps had seen someone else entirely. He emphasized that custodial staff sometimes worked long hours and could easily mistake one faculty member for another in the dimly lit hallways. The conversation took a more serious turn when Detective Harrison revealed the forensic findings about Sarah Lynn's necklace. He didn't provide specific details about the DNA evidence or fingerprints, but he mentioned that the jewelry showed signs of having been deliberately concealed rather than accidentally lost. Stone's reaction was immediate and telling. His face paled slightly, and he asked several pointed questions about what exactly the police had found and when the necklace had been discovered. Stone's most revealing moment came when Detective Harrison asked about his memories of Sarah Lynn as a student. The teacher launched into a detailed description of her academic performance, her participation in class discussions, and even specific assignments she had completed in his course. For a student he had taught 2 years before her disappearance, Stone's recollections were remarkably vivid and personal. When pressed about why he remembered Sarah Lynn so clearly among the hundreds of students he had taught over the years, Stone became visibly uncomfortable. He claimed that her disappearance had made him reflect more deeply on his former students, causing certain memories to become more prominent in his mind. But Detective Harrison sensed there was more to the story than Stone was willing to admit. The interview concluded with Stone agreeing to provide a DNA sample for comparison with evidence from the case, though he requested that the process be handled discreetly to avoid any impact on his current position at Riverside Academy. Carol Watson's hands trembled as she opened the small wooden memory box that had sat undisturbed on her bedroom shelf for over a decade. Inside, carefully preserved between sheets of tissue paper, lay remnants of the most difficult period of her life. Prayer cards from the search vigils, newspaper clippings yellowed with age, and dozens of sympathy notes from well-meaning neighbors and strangers who had followed Sarah Lynn's story in the local media. Near the bottom of the box, Carol found what she was looking for. The anonymous sympathy card was exactly as she remembered it, a simple white card with a generic floral design on the front. The message inside was typed on what appeared to be an old typewriter, the letters slightly uneven and some characters darker than others, suggesting worn ribbon or inconsistent key pressure. Detective Harrison examined the card carefully when Carol brought it to the station that afternoon. The message was brief but chilling in its certainty. "Mrs. Watson, I am deeply sorry for the loss of your beautiful daughter. Sarah Lynn was a special soul who deserved better than the fate that befell her. Please know that she did not suffer long, and that her memory will live on in the hearts of those who truly understood her light. A friend who cares." What made the card particularly unsettling was its tone of intimate knowledge. The sender wrote about Sarah Lynn as if they had known her personally, referring to her light and suggesting familiarity with her character. More disturbing was the assertion that she did not suffer long, a statement that implied direct knowledge of her final moments rather than hopeful speculation. The forensics team found several promising leads on the card. The paper stock was identified as a common brand sold at drugstores and grocery stores throughout Ohio in the mid-1990s. The typewriter font was determined to be Courier, produced by an older manual or electric typewriter rather than a computer printer. Most importantly, there were partial fingerprints on both the card and the envelope, prints that had been preserved by Carol's careful storage. Dr. Chen's analysis revealed that the same industrial cleaning solution found on Sarah Lynn's necklace was also present in trace amounts on the sympathy card. The chemical residue suggested that whoever had handled both items had done so in the same environment or with the same contaminated hands. This connection strengthened the theory that Sarah Lynn's disappearance and the subsequent concealment of evidence were the work of a single individual with access to institutional cleaning supplies. The envelope provided additional clues. The postmark showed it had been mailed from Millbrook's main post office on October 25, 1995, exactly 2 weeks after Sarah Lynn's disappearance. The return address section was blank, but there were microscopic fibers stuck to the envelope's adhesive edge, fibers that matched those found on the necklace chain. Detective Harrison realized that the timing of the card was significant. 2 weeks after the disappearance, the police investigation was still intense, with daily searches and regular media coverage. Sending such a card required considerable boldness, or perhaps a psychological need to insert oneself into the grieving process. It suggested someone who wanted to be part of the narrative while maintaining their anonymity. When the detective compared the fingerprints from the card with those recently taken from Mr. Stone, the results sent a chill through the investigation team. 3 partial prints showed strong similarities, enough to warrant a formal comparison by certified forensic experts. While not yet definitive proof, the preliminary match was compelling enough to justify obtaining a search warrant for Stone's current residence and any storage units or properties he might own. The revelation that someone had taken the time to comfort Carol with false sympathy while possessing knowledge of her daughter's death transformed the investigation from a missing person case into something far more sinister. Someone had been playing a cruel psychological game for 17 years, and now the rules were finally changing. The search warrant was executed at dawn on a crisp Thursday morning in November. Stone's modest 2-bedroom house in a quiet Columbus suburb looked like any other middle-class home, with its neat front yard and carefully maintained flower beds. Nothing about the exterior suggested the dark secrets that might be hidden within its walls. Detective Harrison led a team of 4 officers and 2 forensic specialists into the house, where they found Stone waiting in his living room, still in his bathrobe and appearing genuinely shocked by the early morning intrusion. He had been served with the warrant papers by local Columbus police an hour earlier and instructed to remain on the premises while the search was conducted. The house itself was meticulously organized, almost obsessively so. Books were arranged alphabetically on built-in shelves, and every surface was free of clutter. Stone's study contained an impressive collection of literature and drama texts, along with student papers neatly filed by semester and year. The forensic team began their careful examination, looking for any connection to Sarah Lynn or evidence of the industrial cleaning products detected on her necklace and the sympathy card. In Stone's basement, investigators discovered what appeared to be a small workshop area. An old manual typewriter sat on a wooden desk, its keys worn from years of use. When they tested it, the courier font matched perfectly with the typeface on the anonymous sympathy card. Nearby, they found a supply of cleaning products, including the specific industrial solvent that had been identified in the forensic analysis. But the most disturbing discovery came when they searched Stone's bedroom closet. Hidden behind a row of winter coats, investigators found a cardboard box containing what could only be described as a shrine to Sarah Lynn Watson. The box held dozens of photographs that appeared to have been taken without her knowledge, showing her at school, walking to her car, and sitting in the library. Some photos were close-ups that must have required a telephoto lens, capturing intimate moments when Sarah Lynn thought she was alone. Along with the photographs, the box contained several of Sarah Lynn's personal items that had supposedly been lost over the years. A blue hair ribbon she had worn frequently, a small notebook where she had practiced writing her signature, and most chilling of all, a copy of the essay Stone had mentioned during his interview, the one about ambition and sacrifice in Macbeth. The paper was covered with what appeared to be Stone's handwritten comments, but the margins also contained personal observations about Sarah Lynn's appearance and behavior that went far beyond normal teacher feedback. Detective Harrison found Stone's journal hidden beneath the false bottom of a desk drawer. The entries, dating back to 1994, revealed an escalating obsession with Sarah Lynn that had begun when she was just 15 years old. Stone wrote about watching her during class, following her movements around the school, and fantasizing about conversations they might have if she truly understood his feelings for her. The journal entries around the time of homecoming painted a disturbing picture of a man whose obsession had crossed into dangerous territory. Stone wrote about feeling jealous of her relationship with Tommy Chin and frustrated by what he perceived as Sarah Lynn's failure to recognize the depth of his interest in her. The final entry, dated October 13, 1995, was the most ominous. "Tonight everything changes. She will finally understand what she means to me, and if she cannot accept that understanding, then no one else will have her either." When confronted with the evidence, Stone's carefully maintained facade finally cracked. He sat in his living room, surrounded by the physical proof of his obsession, and began to speak in a voice barely above a whisper. He admitted that he had been in love with Sarah Lynn, that he had tried to approach her that homecoming night to confess his feelings, and that when she had rejected him with horror and disgust, something inside him had broken beyond repair. Stone's confession came in broken fragments, punctuated by long silences and tears that seemed to surprise him as much as they did the investigators listening. Sitting in the formal interview room at Columbus Police Department, with Detective Harrison across from him and a court-appointed attorney by his side, Stone finally began to unravel the terrible events of that October night 17 years ago. He described how he had watched Sarah Lynn throughout the homecoming dance, noting every smile she shared with Tommy Chin, every laugh that wasn't directed at him, every moment that reinforced his growing desperation. Stone had convinced himself over the months leading up to that night that Sarah Lynn must have feelings for him too, that her polite interactions during her sophomore year had been signals of a deeper connection waiting to be acknowledged. When Sarah Lynn stepped outside for fresh air around 10:45, Stone saw his opportunity. He had followed her to the side entrance of the gymnasium, where she stood alone on the steps, looking up at the stars and enjoying the cool October breeze. Stone approached her carefully, telling her he needed to speak with her about something important. Sarah Lynn had been kind but confused when Stone began to express his feelings for her. She had tried to let him down gently, explaining that she was flattered but that any romantic relationship between a teacher and student would be inappropriate and impossible. Her rejection, delivered with the sweet honesty of a 16-year-old who genuinely didn't want to hurt his feelings, had shattered Stone's carefully constructed fantasy. In that moment, Stone's obsession transformed into something much darker. He grabbed Sarah Lynn's arm as she tried to return to the dance, demanding that she listen to him, that she understand the depth of his devotion to her. When she pulled away and threatened to report his behavior to the administration, Stone panicked. He couldn't bear the thought of losing his position, his reputation, and any chance of remaining near her. The struggle that followed was brief but devastating. Stone admitted that he had not intended to kill Sarah Lynn, but when she screamed for help, he covered her mouth with his hand and held her too tightly too long. By the time he realized what he had done, she was unconscious and not breathing. His attempts to revive her failed, and within minutes, the girl he claimed to love was dead in his arms. What followed was a calculated cover-up that revealed the true depth of Stone's psychological disturbance. He carried Sarah Lynn's body to his car, parked in the faculty lot away from the student areas. He removed her shoes and placed them on the gymnasium steps to suggest she had left voluntarily. He took her necklace as what he called a remembrance and drove her body to a remote wooded area about 30 miles from the school. Stone described burying Sarah Lynn in a shallow grave beneath a large oak tree, marking the location with a small pile of stones that would look natural to any casual observer. He had visited the site regularly over the years, he admitted, sometimes bringing flowers, sometimes just sitting quietly and talking to her as if she could hear him. The industrial cleaning products found on the necklace and sympathy card were explained by Stone's obsessive need to maintain the evidence of his crime while keeping it close to him. He had cleaned the necklace repeatedly over the years, handling it when he felt lonely or when he wanted to remember that night. The decision to hide it at the school had come only recently, when he learned about the renovation project and realized that someone might eventually discover his shrine to Sarah Lynn in his home. The coordinates Stone provided led Detective Harrison and a forensic recovery team to a secluded area of Blackwood Forest, about 40 minutes from Millbrook. The location was accessible only by an old logging road that had been abandoned for years, overgrown with brambles and small saplings that spoke to its disuse. Stone had chosen well, investigators realized, selecting a spot where human intrusion was unlikely and where nature would help conceal his terrible secret. The oak tree Stone described stood exactly where he said it would, ancient and massive, its gnarled roots creating natural hollows in the earth around its base. Beneath its canopy, the forensic team found the small pile of stones that had served as Sarah Lynn's unmarked grave marker for 17 years. The stones appeared weathered and natural, carefully arranged to look like a random formation that wouldn't draw attention from hikers or hunters who might pass through the area. Sarah Watson stood at the edge of the recovery site, supported by Detective Harrison and a victim services counselor, watching as the team carefully excavated the area Stone had indicated. She had insisted on being present when her daughter was found, despite the detective's gentle suggestions that she might want to wait for notification rather than witness the process firsthand. The excavation revealed that Stone had dug deeper than a typical shallow grave, perhaps 3 feet down, and had taken care to preserve Sarah Lynn's body as much as possible. She had been wrapped in what appeared to be a plastic tarp, and over the years, the forest environment had naturally mummified her remains rather than allowing complete decomposition. Her blue homecoming dress was still recognizable, though faded and fragmented by time and earth. Dr. Chin supervised the careful removal of Sarah Lynn's remains, noting details that would be crucial for the official cause of death determination. Even after 17 years, the positioning of the body and the preservation of certain tissues would allow forensic pathologists to confirm Stone's account of how Sarah Lynn had died. There were no signs of additional trauma beyond what Stone had described, supporting his claim that her death had resulted from asphyxiation during their struggle. Among the personal effects found with Sarah Lynn's body was her homecoming crown, the small tiara she had worn so proudly just hours before her death. Stone had apparently felt compelled to bury it with her, perhaps as an acknowledgement of the moment when her life had been cut short. The crown was tarnished and fragmented, but Carol recognized it immediately, remembering how radiant Sarah Lynn had looked when it was placed on her head during the ceremony. As the forensic team worked methodically to recover every fragment of evidence and every piece of Sarah Lynn that could be found, Detective Harrison reflected on the twisted psychology that had driven Stone's actions for nearly 2 decades. The teacher had maintained an elaborate fantasy relationship with a dead girl, visiting her grave like a devoted boyfriend, tending to her memory while simultaneously living a normal life and teaching other young students. The most disturbing aspect of Stone's behavior had been his ability to compartmentalize his crime. For 17 years he had continued working with teenagers, directing school plays, grading essays, and earning the trust of parents and administrators. None of his colleagues at Riverside Academy had suspected that their respected English teacher was carrying such a dark secret. When the recovery was complete and Sarah Lynn's remains had been carefully transported to the medical examiner's office, Carol finally allowed herself to cry with a mixture of grief and relief. Her daughter was coming home at last, and while the circumstances were heartbreaking, the uncertainty that had poisoned so many years of her life was finally over. The courtroom in downtown Columbus was packed on the morning of Richard Stone's sentencing hearing. Carol Watson sat in the front row, wearing a navy blue dress that reminded her of the one Sarah Lynn had chosen for homecoming, flanked by family members and friends who had supported her through 17 years of uncertainty and now through the painful process of finally learning the truth. Stone had pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and abuse of a corpse, avoiding a trial that would have forced Carol to endure months of testimony about her daughter's final moments. His attorney had negotiated the plea in exchange for Stone's cooperation in locating Sarah Lynn's remains and providing a complete confession. The judge had accepted the plea, but made it clear that the sentencing would reflect the full severity of Stone's crimes. During the victim impact portion of the hearing, Carol stood before the man who had stolen her daughter's life and spoke with a strength that surprised even herself. She described the 17 years of not knowing, the sleepless nights wondering if Sarah Lynn was alive somewhere, suffering or calling for help. She talked about the birthdays celebrated with an empty chair, the graduations and weddings Sarah Lynn would never experience, the grandchildren Carol would never hold. Carol also spoke about the cruel psychological torture of Stone's anonymous sympathy card, how his false comfort had added another layer of pain to her grief. She explained how Stone's decision to hide Sarah Lynn's necklace at the school had forced her to relive the trauma of that October night, making her hope against hope that her daughter might somehow still be alive. Stone himself was given the opportunity to address the court before sentencing. He stood slowly, his once confident demeanor replaced by the broken posture of a man who had finally been forced to confront the magnitude of his actions. His voice was barely audible as he attempted to express remorse for what he had done to Sarah Lynn and to Carol. He spoke about the obsession that had consumed him, acknowledging that his feelings for Sarah Lynn had been inappropriate and dangerous from the beginning. Stone admitted that he had convinced himself that his love for her justified his behavior, but that he now understood the selfish and destructive nature of his actions. He said he had visited her grave not out of respect, but because he couldn't let go of his twisted fantasy of a relationship that had never existed. Stone also revealed details that hadn't come out during his confession. He admitted to deliberately scheduling himself for homecoming supervision that night, knowing it would give him access to Sarah Lynn. He had been planning for weeks to find a moment alone with her, convinced that if he could just explain his feelings properly, she would understand and reciprocate them. The judge's sentence reflected both the severity of the crime and the additional torment Stone had inflicted on Sarah Lynn's family over the years. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 25 years, ensuring that he would be at least 73 years old before he could even be considered for release. As Stone was led away in handcuffs, Carol felt a complex mixture of emotions. The man who had killed her daughter would spend the rest of his productive life behind bars, but no amount of punishment could restore what had been lost. The closure she had sought for so long had finally arrived, but it came with the bitter knowledge that Sarah Lynn's death had been both senseless and preventable. 6 months after Stone's sentencing, on a warm spring morning in 2013, Sarah Lynn Watson was finally laid to rest in Millbrook Cemetery under a canopy of blooming cherry trees. The funeral that should have happened 17 years earlier was attended by hundreds of people, many of whom had never stopped hoping for this day to come. Former classmates, now in their 30s with families of their own, stood alongside teachers who had retired years ago but still remembered the bright 16-year-old who had vanished from their lives. Carol had chosen a simple white headstone with Sarah Lynn's name, dates, and the inscription "Beloved daughter, forever 16, forever in our hearts." Beside the grave, she placed a small memorial garden with the purple irises that had been Sarah Lynn's favorite flowers, flowers that would bloom each spring as a reminder of the life that had been cut short but never forgotten. Eddie Morales attended the service, standing quietly near the back of the gathering. Detective Harrison had made sure to personally thank him for his careful attention to detail and his willingness to speak up about what he had observed all those years ago. Without Eddie's sharp memory and his decision to preserve the truth even when it seemed uncomfortable, Sarah Lynn might never have been found. The janitor's simple act of conscience had broken open a case that had seemed unsolvable. Tommy Chin, Sarah Lynn's homecoming date, had flown in from California where he now worked as a pediatric doctor. He spoke briefly about the girl he had loved at 16, sharing memories of her laughter and her dreams of becoming a teacher herself. Tommy had married and had children of his own, but he told Carol that not a single homecoming season passed without him thinking of Sarah Lynn and wondering what might have been. In the months following the funeral, Carol found herself able to talk about Sarah Lynn in ways she hadn't been able to do for years. The knowledge of what had happened, however terrible, had freed her from the paralyzing uncertainty that had consumed so much of her life. She began volunteering with a support group for families of missing persons, using her experience to help others navigate the impossible space between hope and despair. Detective Harrison visited Carol regularly in the first year after the case closed, checking on her well-being and sharing updates about the investigation's impact on other cold cases. The forensic techniques used to solve Sarah Lynn's disappearance had already helped identify evidence in 3 other unsolved crimes, creating a ripple effect of justice that extended far beyond one family's tragedy. Carol also maintained contact with the current staff at Lincoln High School, working with them to establish a scholarship in Sarah Lynn's name for students interested in pursuing education careers. The scholarship requirements emphasized not just academic achievement, but also kindness, integrity, and the kind of bright spirit that Sarah Lynn had embodied. On quiet evenings, Carol would sometimes drive past the school where her daughter had spent her final happy moments. The building had been renovated and modernized, but the memory of that October night in 1995 would always be part of its history. Where once there had been only questions and shadows, there was now truth and remembrance. Sarah Lynn Watson had finally come home, and while 17 years of separation could never be recovered, her mother could rest knowing that her daughter's story had reached its conclusion with dignity, justice, and the enduring power of love that transcends even death itself.